So we have another conglomeration of musicians from different bands to create a whole new entity. And I love when bands do this. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. So let's find out if this one works. The Further Side by Nova Collective. So Nova Collective is, as I said, a conglomeration of different musicians from other bands coming together as one new entity. Rounding off this four-member group, we have Dan Briggs from Between the Buried and Me playing bass. We have Richard Hamshell from Haken playing the lead guitar. We also have Pete Jones joining us from Haken. He was kind of back in the early days of Haken. And running off this quad of individuals is Matt Lynch from Trioscope. And out of all of the players, he's the only one that I'm not too familiar with. And he's bringing up the main drumming there. So coming in, I kind of knew kind of what to expect with these previous bands. I mean, I love Between the Buried and Me, and I know what Dan can bring within the bass playing. I know how he handles a rhythm section, and I know how he can add a little bit of flourish without taking center stage. And on the same light, I know how Richard and Pete like to play amongst one another on keyboards as well as on guitar. The only wild card was the percussive that Matt brought into this. And so coming in, it is pretty much exactly what I was expecting with these types of musicians. They were marketing this as more of a jazz ensemble in more of like a metal scene. And so coming in, I knew exactly what I was getting, and I was not disappointed. It actually met every single expectation that I have with all the musicians that were coming in. So from the get-go, what we have here is beautiful progressive metal jazz music. The time signatures are all over the place, and in a constructed way that seems very natural. Everything is very meticulously thought out before really hunkering down and playing it, but it's also very complex and organic. Whenever this kind of jazz comes in, it could feel overly too tight and almost artificial, but here on this album, everything flows very, very well. Part of the charm about this album is everything feels as though it's not new. Like, this doesn't sound like a new band by any stretch. This sounds like a lot of musicians that have worked very closely with one another for quite a while. Now, coming into the specific songs, there's no real low point, and kind of the trade-off as well, there's really no high point as well. This is just part of the risk you run when you're dealing with this type of music, because it's so kind of all over the place. It has a harder time to kind of stick to the bones. Now, that being said, there's still quite a number of movements on here that I just am wowed about. It's just harder to recall them upon later listens after the first 1, 2, sometimes even half a dozen times of listening to this album. So getting into the specific songs on this album, it opens up with Dancing Machines. And it's funny because the first couple of notes that I'm hearing on this album, it reminds me very much of a South Side of the Sky from Yes. Just that same kind of groove that it has, at least with those same opening notes. I almost expected them to go straight into South Side of the Sky in more of a jazzy, progressive type of a style. But it's definitely kind of shied away from it once we get into that music. And it becomes apparent very, very quickly that any kind of wild card hesitations that I might have to Matt's playing was soon thrown out of the window, because immediately I latched on. I'm like, okay, this guy knows how to handle himself with these other musicians. And as with any kind of song in this type of a style, I love where the song goes. I love it's always bending and it's always shaping and reshaping itself as we kind of go through the landscape. Everybody's playing style, as I already mentioned, is so familiar with one another, it's hard to believe that this is their first album. The second song of Cascades, near the beginning middle part, in and around that area, there's a section that feels very much as though it was lifted off of anything from the later Between the Buried and Me, say from like the Parallax or the Coma Eclectic. Those sounds are definitely permeated on this track, on the third song of Air. And I love how funky this song starts off. Like, it's so boppy and fun while we're coming into the rhythm section in this. Just the amount of fun that these players are having, it's hard not to feel that. And that's definitely something that is found on this album that I couldn't say for a lot of this type of metal, is the amount of fun that's being felt on here. Because really, at the end of the day, that's kind of where jazz came from, is that fun atmosphere of music. The next song, of State of Flux, It's always shifting, much like the title would have kind of told you about, but each song has this moment on it that I'm just like, holy crap, this is amazing music. And one that I want to kind of reach out and talk about, and I'll talk about another one in a second, but is Ripped Apart and Reassembled, that 5th track on this album. Near the ending, like this big build-up that's coming up, we have such an amazing build into this great crescendo where once the keyboards hit in, like the rhythm section as well as the guitars is providing a great foundation and into this point. And then once the keyboards hit in, that's when I'm just like, I'm dealing with something special here. But really, where I knew I was dealing with something really interesting was on that last track, the title track of The Further Side. Near the midpoint, just beyond the midpoint there, we have this amazing build and this fantastic resolution. From everything leading up to this point, we've always had great builds and finally like great kind of climaxes, but then that's about it, and then the song would either end or move on from there. Here on The Further Side, that final track, we have this fantastic build, and once we get to that, resolution, that climax, it just kind of keeps going for quite a while, and then it just slowly kind of peters out, and I like how they structured that. And the one thing that I will say about a lot of these build-ups and a lot of these resolutions is whenever I'm listening to a lot of these songs, I'm kind of waiting for those points to occur. But on this album, I'm never really waiting for that. I'm enjoying the ride as I'm getting to it. And that kind of rounds off the album really nicely. It's one that I highly recommend if you're a fan of Between the Buried and Me, if you're a fan of Haken, if you're a fan of this type of musical styles, then you have to check it out. I definitely have to say, if you can find it on physical form, pick it up, because this deserves to be in your collection. So that's about it from me. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting below. Thank you guys so much as always for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.